Australia has nearly 60,000 kilometres of coastline. Most people only ever see about 1% of it. Tucked between the famous beaches and the tourist strips are coastal towns so quiet, so remote, and so overlooked that even Australians who have lived here their whole lives have never heard of them. A town where kangaroos outnumber people on the beach. A fishing village at the edge of a wilderness so vast it has no roads. A whaling port that time forgot. In this video, we are counting down 13 hidden coastal towns in Australia that even locals do not know. Stay with me to the end, because number 1 is a place so beautiful and so isolated that the handful of people who live there would probably prefer you never found out about it. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's begin. Number 13. Wye River, Great Ocean Road, Victoria. Most people who drive the Great Ocean Road are heading to the 12 Apostles. They pass through dozens of small towns along the way, and almost all of them blur together. Wye River is the one that should not blur. Tucked into a steep, forested valley where the Otway Ranges meet the Southern Ocean, Wye River has a permanent population of fewer than 100 people. There is no supermarket, no petrol station, no traffic lights. What there is a general store, a handful of holiday houses scattered through the bush on the hillside above the beach, and one of the most beautiful stretches of sand on the entire coast. In December 2015, a bushfire swept through the hills above the town and destroyed 116 homes. The community rebuilt, but the population never fully recovered. Today, Wye River feels like a place that exists between two states. Not quite abandoned, not quite thriving. If you pull off the Great Ocean Road and walk down to the beach on a weekday, you will likely have it entirely to yourself. The surf rolls in from Bass Strait. The bush drops steeply to the sand. The silence is the kind that only exists in places where almost no one lives. Number 12. Coffin Bay, South Australia. On the Eyre Peninsula, about 7 hours west of Adelaide, sits a town with a name that sounds ominous and a reality that is anything but. Coffin Bay was named by Matthew Flinders in 1802 after his friend Sir Isaac Coffin. The name has nothing to do with death, though it does keep the tourist numbers down. The town sits on a sheltered inlet surrounded by the wild, windswept coastline of Coffin Bay National Park. The population hovers around 600. The main industries are fishing and oyster farming, and the oysters grown here, Coffin Bay oysters, are considered among the finest in the world. They are farmed in the cold, clean waters of the bay, fed entirely by nutrients from the Southern Ocean. If you visit, you can eat them straight from the water on a guided oyster tour, standing knee-deep in the bay. Beyond the town, the national park is raw and remote. Enormous sand dunes back onto beaches that stretch for kilometres without a footprint. The water is turquoise, almost Caribbean in colour, but the temperature is decidedly Southern Ocean. Coffin Bay is the kind of place that rewards people willing to drive a long way from anywhere. Number 11. Stanley, Tasmania. On the far northwest coast of Tasmania, about 4 hours from Hobart, a small fishing town sits in the shadow of a geological oddity. The Nut, a massive volcanic plug that rises 152 metres straight up from the ocean like a flat-topped pillar, dominates the town from every angle. It is the solidified core of a volcano that erupted over 13 million years ago. The surrounding softer rock long since eroded away by the Southern Ocean. What remains is a sheer-sided mesa that looks as though it was placed there by something other than nature. Stanley wraps around the base of the Nut, its heritage buildings and fishing wharves facing a harbour that has been in use since the 1820s. The town was one of the first European settlements in northwest Tasmania, established by the Van Diemen's Land Company as a base for its pastoral operations. Highfield House, the company's original headquarters, built in 1835, still stands on the hillside above the town, overlooking the harbour and the Bass Strait beyond. Today, about 500 people live here. The main street is lined with colonial-era buildings that look as though they have not changed in a century. The pub still serves counter meals. Fishing boats still work the harbour. Crayfishing season brings a brief burst of activity. The rest of the year, Stanley is quiet in a way that feels permanent. If you take the chairlift to the top of the Nut and walk the circular track around its flat summit, you look down on a town that seems impossibly small against the scale of the ocean stretching away in both directions. On a clear day, you can see the coast of Victoria across Bass Strait. Stanley is not hidden because it is hard to find. It is hidden because Tasmania's northwest coast is one of the most overlooked regions in Australia. Number 10. Kalbarri, Western Australia. About 6 hours north of Perth, where the Murchison River meets the Indian Ocean, sits a town that most West Australians know about, but very few outsiders have ever visited. Kalbarri has a permanent population of about 1,500, and it serves as the gateway to Kalbarri National Park, a landscape of red and white banded sandstone gorges carved over 400 million years by the Murchison River. The gorges are spectacular. Nature's Window, a natural rock arch that frames a view down the river, is one of the most photographed formations in Western Australia. But most visitors come for the day and leave. If you stay in the town itself, you find something different. The coastline south of Kalbarri is lined with dramatic sea cliffs, natural rock bridges, and blowholes that erupt with each swell. The beach at the river mouth is sheltered and calm. Pelicans gather on the sand every afternoon in numbers that seem improbable. And at night, the sky is dark enough to see the Milky Way reflected in the ocean. Kalbarri sits at a point where the arid interior of Western Australia meets the sea, and the result is a landscape that feels like nowhere else on the continent. Number 9. Agnes Water and 1770, Queensland. About 6 hours north of Brisbane, at the end of a road that winds through cane fields and bushland, two tiny communities sit at the southern tip of the Great Barrier Reef. Agnes Water, population around 2,000, is the northernmost surf beach in Australia. The waves here are consistent, warm, and uncrowded. Learners paddle out alongside experienced surfers, and on most days there is enough space in the lineup that no one has to compete for a wave. Just a few minutes down the road, the even smaller settlement of 1770, or 1770 as the locals write it, occupies the headland where Lieutenant James Cook made his second landing on the Australian coast in May 1770. A monument marks the spot. The view from the headland looks out across an estuary where dolphins are a daily occurrence, and the water shifts from turquoise to emerald depending on the tide. The contrast between the two towns is striking. Agnes Water has a relaxed, slightly scruffy surf town feel, a general store, a few cafes, a surf club, and backpacker hostels that fill up in winter when the southern states get cold and travellers head north. 1770 is quieter and more scenic. Its houses perched on a hillside above a marina that serves as the departure point for reef and island tours. The reef is close enough for day trips. Lady Musgrave Island, a coral cay surrounded by a turquoise lagoon, is just a few hours by boat. And because the nearest major town is Bundaberg, 130 kilometres to the south, the tourist infrastructure that defines much of the Queensland coast has simply never arrived here. Agnes Water and 1770 are not undiscovered, but they are the kind of places where, if you arrive on a Tuesday in February, you might be the only person on the beach, and the reef is right there, just offshore, waiting. Number 8. Brooms Head, New South Wales. About halfway between Grafton and Yamba on the New South Wales north coast, a tiny village sits on a headland above a beach of extraordinary colour. Brooms Head has a permanent population of fewer than 300 people. There is one general store, one caravan park, a volunteer surf club, and a coastline that shifts from deep red rock at its northern end to wide golden sand at its southern. The village is bounded by the Uragia National Park, one of the largest undeveloped stretches of coastline remaining in New South Wales, and by Lake Aragon, a calm freshwater lake perfect for kayaking and canoeing. Wild emus wander through the streets. Eastern grey kangaroos graze on the headland at dawn. The sunrises, viewed from the headland walking track, are among the best on the east coast. Brooms Head is overshadowed by its more famous neighbours, Yamba to the north and Coffs Harbour to the south. And that obscurity is its greatest asset. If you are looking for a coastal town that feels genuinely untouched, Brooms Head is it. And hey, before we move on to our next entry, I hope you are enjoying this video so far. If you are, it would mean a lot to us if you hit that like button and shared this with a friend. Now let's continue. Number 7. Mallacoota, Victoria. 6 hours east of Melbourne, at the very end of the road in far east Gippsland, a small town sits at the confluence of two lake systems and the Tasman Sea. Mallacoota is one of the most geographically isolated towns on the Victorian coast. There is only one road in, and it winds through over 50 kilometres of dense bush from the Princes Highway. At the end of the road, you find a town of about 1,000 people spread around the shores of Mallacoota Inlet, a vast, quiet body of water that feeds into the ocean through a narrow entrance. The surrounding Croajingolong National Park is UNESCO listed as a World Biosphere Reserve, one of only 15 in Australia. The beaches are wild, empty, and backed by ancient dune systems that have been building for thousands of years. Kangaroos and wallabies wander through the town as though the streets belong to them. Dolphins feed in the inlet. The bird life is extraordinary. Over 300 species have been recorded in the surrounding national park. On New Year's Eve 2019, Mallacoota was surrounded by the Black Summer bushfires. Over 4,000 residents and tourists were trapped on the foreshore as the sky turned red, then orange, then pitch black at 9 in the morning. Embers rained onto the beach. The fire closed every road out. Families stood in the water, holding children, watching the hills burn. For hours, the only light came from the fire itself. They were eventually evacuated over the following days by HMAS Choules and military helicopters, the largest peacetime evacuation in Australian history. Over 100 homes were destroyed. The town has rebuilt, but the memory of that day has not faded. If you visit Mallacoota today, you find a community that has stared into something most Australians only see on television and come out the other side. The inlet is still calm, the beaches are still empty, and the bush, scarred in places but recovering with the stubborn patience of eucalyptus, still presses in from every side. Number 6. Penishaw, Kangaroo Island, South Australia. On the eastern tip of Kangaroo Island, facing the mainland across Backstairs Passage, sits the first town that most visitors see when they arrive by ferry, and the one most of them immediately drive past on their way to somewhere else. Penishaw has a permanent population of about 350. It has a pub, a general store, a small museum, and a colony of little penguins that nest in the rocks below the foreshore and can be seen on guided tours at dusk. The town was the site of one of the earliest European settlements in South Australia, a sealing and whaling station established in the early 1800s, before Adelaide even existed. Sealers and whalers lived rough on the coastline, hunting the colonies of fur seals and southern right whales that once filled these waters. The whales are coming back. Southern rights are now regularly spotted from the Penishaw foreshore during the winter months, sometimes close enough to see their calloused heads from the cliff path. Penishaw is the kind of town that exists as a gateway, a place people pass through on their way to the bigger attractions further west. But if you stop, have a beer at the pub, walk the cliff path at sunset, and wait for the little penguins to waddle ashore after dark, you will wonder why you were in such a hurry. Number 5. Strahan, Tasmania. On the remote west coast of Tasmania, on the shores of Macquarie Harbour, the largest natural harbour in Australia, sits a town of about 600 people that was once the gateway to the darkest place in the British Empire. Strahan is the departure point for cruises to Sarah Island, the convict penal station where men were chained, flogged, and in at least 2 documented cases ate each other to survive. The harbour entrance, known as Hell's Gates, is a narrow, treacherous channel battered by the Southern Ocean. Every boat that enters or leaves Macquarie Harbour must pass through it. But the town itself is a world away from that history. Painted weatherboard cottages line the waterfront. A small railway, the West Coast Wilderness Railway, runs through temperate rainforest to the mining town of Queenstown, crossing bridges and climbing gradients that were considered impossible when the line was first built. The harbour is enormous still and surrounded by some of the oldest trees on Earth, Huon pines that were alive when the Roman Empire fell. Some of them have been dated at over 2,000 years old. The Gordon River, which feeds the harbour from the south, is so tannin-stained that its surface reflects the surrounding forest like a mirror. Cruises up the Gordon River pass through old-growth rainforest that has never been logged. A landscape that played a central role in the Franklin Dam controversy of the early 1980s, one of the defining environmental battles in Australian history. Strahan is isolated. The drive from Hobart takes about 4.5 hours through some of the wildest country in Australia. The West Coast receives more rain than almost anywhere else on the continent. In winter, the storms come in from the Southern Ocean with nothing between Strahan and South America but open water. But on a calm evening, when the harbour is flat and the light turns the water gold, Strahan is one of the most beautiful places in Australia. It is a town that exists at the edge of civilization, and it knows it. Number 4. Esperance, Western Australia. If you are willing to drive, and in Western Australia, driving is not optional, Esperance is the reward. Sitting on the south coast, about 7 hours southeast of Perth, Esperance has a permanent population of around 14,000, which makes it the largest town on this list by a considerable margin. But its remoteness keeps it hidden from everyone except West Australians and the occasional overlander completing the coastal loop. The beaches at Esperance are routinely described as the widest in Australia. Lucky Bay, in the Cape Le Grand National Park, just east of town, is famous for kangaroos that lie on the sand in the sun, seemingly unbothered by the humans who photograph them. The water is so blue it looks digitally enhanced. It is not. The Great Ocean Drive, a 40-kilometre loop west of town, passes a series of bays: Twilight Beach, Blue Haven, West Beach, each one more striking than the last. The Recherche Archipelago, a chain of over 100 islands scattered offshore, is home to fur seals, sea lions, and one of the largest colonies of Cape Barren geese in the world. Esperance is not hidden in the traditional sense. It is hidden by distance. The nearest city of any size is Perth, 700 kilometres away. The nearest town to the west is Norseman, a 2-hour drive through wheat fields and scrub. Esperance is the reward you get for driving further than most people are willing to go. Number 3. Cossack, Western Australia. On a spit of land at the mouth of the Harding River in the Pilbara, about 30 minutes from Karatha, sits the most historically significant coastal ghost town in Western Australia. Cossack was the first European port in the northwest, settled in 1863, originally named Tien Sin, after the ship that brought the first settler, Walter Padbury, to the area. It was renamed Cossack in 1872 after the vessel that carried Governor Frederick Weld to the town. For decades, Cossack was the Pilbara's connection to the world. Wool, gold, and pearls flowing out through its harbour, immigrants flowing in. By the 1870s, the town had become the birthplace of Western Australia's pearling industry. Up to 80 luggers operated from the harbour, crewed largely by Aboriginal, Malay, and Japanese divers who worked the seabed in conditions of extreme danger. The work was lethal. Many died from the bends, shark attack, or sheer exhaustion. A cyclone in 1881 destroyed the town and every boat in the harbour. But the pearling industry rebuilt. For a time, Cossack thrived. Then the decline came, slowly, inevitably. The harbour silted up. Larger ships could not enter. The pearling industry moved north to Broome. A new jetty at Point Sampson diverted what little trade remained. Cossack was officially dissolved in 1910. By 1950, it was fully abandoned. Today, 12 heritage-listed bluestone buildings have been restored and open to the public. A police station, a customs house, a courthouse, a post office. They stand among the ruins of a town that once connected the entire Pilbara to the outside world. In 2020, the entire 22-hectare town site was put up for sale by the Western Australian government. Cossack is a hidden coastal town, not because people cannot find it, but because almost no one is looking. It sits at the intersection of ocean and desert, saltwater and red earth, and it waits, as it has for over a century, for someone to notice. Number 2. Binalong Bay, Tasmania. At the southern end of the Bay of Fires, a 50-kilometre stretch of coastline consistently ranked among the most beautiful in the world, sits a tiny town that most people have never heard of. Binalong Bay has a permanent population of about 200. It has no pub, no petrol station, no supermarket. What it has is water so clear it looks like glass, rock formations stained orange by ancient lichen, white sand that squeaks underfoot, and a coastline that stretches north into wilderness for kilometres without a single building, road or structure of any kind. The Bay of Fires was named by Captain Tobias Furneaux in 1773, who saw fires lit by Aboriginal people along the shore. A coastline that had been inhabited for tens of thousands of years. Today, the southern end at Binalong Bay is the only part of the bay accessible by sealed road. North of the town, the coast becomes progressively more remote. A walking track, the Bay of Fires Lodge Walk, takes hikers over 4 days through country that has barely changed since Furneaux sailed past. The sunrises at Binalong Bay are staggering. The lichen-covered granite boulders glow orange and red against the blue of the Tasman Sea. If you arrive early enough, you will share the beach with nothing but wallabies and the occasional oyster catcher picking through the rock pools. Binalong Bay is the gateway to one of the most spectacular coastlines on Earth, and most Australians could not point to it on a map. And now, we have reached number 1. And if you have stayed with me this far, I promise you, this is the place that makes every other entry on this list feel crowded. Number 1. Bawaka, East Arnhem Land, Northern Territory. About an hour's drive from Nhulunbuy, at the end of a dirt track through tropical savanna, a small Yolngu homeland sits on a stretch of coastline so pristine it feels like the world has not yet arrived. Bawaka is not a town in any conventional sense. It is a homeland, a place where a Yolngu family has lived for thousands of years, on country that connects to the oldest continuous culture on Earth. The beach is wide, white, and framed by pandanus palms and monsoon vine forest. The water is warm and clear. Sea turtles nest on the sand. Dugongs graze in the shallows. In the dry season, the sky at night is so dark and so full of stars that the Milky Way casts a faint shadow on the ground. You cannot visit Bawaka without an invitation. Access is managed entirely through Leary Tourism, a Yolngu-owned enterprise that offers guided cultural experiences on country. Visitors learn about Yolngu kinship systems, traditional fishing and crab hunting, art, storytelling, and the deep, layered connection between people and place that defines life in Arnhem Land. There is no hotel, no restaurant, no gift shop. The experience is not about consumption. It is about listening. What makes Biwaka extraordinary is not just its beauty, though it is one of the most beautiful places in Australia. It is the fact that this coastline has been cared for, lived on, and known by the same people for over 40,000 years. The dunes you walk on have been walked on for longer than any city, any monument, any written history on Earth. The fish traps in the rocks are not relics. They are still in use. The songlines that map this coast are not museum artifacts. They are still sung. Biwaka is hidden not by distance alone, though it is genuinely remote, but by a different kind of boundary. It is Aboriginal land, managed by the people who have always lived here, and open only on their terms. If you are invited, what you find is not a tourist attraction. It is a living culture on a coastline that has never been abandoned, never been colonised in the way the rest of Australia was, and never been built over with the infrastructure of the modern world. Biwaka is not a ghost town. It is the opposite. It is one of the oldest, continuously inhabited places on the planet, and it sits on a beach that most Australians will never see. The water is warm. The sand is white. The stars are closer than you have ever seen them. And beneath your feet, 40,000 years of footprints lead in every direction. I hope you have enjoyed this video, so make sure to share it with your friends and see you in the next video.